about 20 years ago, me and my stupid Guido friends went to a comedy club in Brooklyn called Pips, legendary comedy club. And we sat right in front because we thought that was a good idea. And the comedian on stage made fun of my friends and I. Just tore us apart. And I saw them all sort of shrink into their seats because they hated being picked on so much. These are, big boisterous Guidos. They didn't want to be told, that we looked like a five-way male orgy going out together. And so I loved it. I thought it was the funniest thing ever, and I had wanted to do stand-up at the time. And that moment always stuck in my head as I started doing stand-up, I want to make people feel that badly about themselves. And that comic, his name was Goumba Johnny, who went on to be, or already was at the moment, a New York radio icon. And he is a huge stand-up with Anthony Rodia. You can see them on tour all over the country. And that is today's guest, the great Goumba Johnny. And this, much like the amount of hair gel and spray and cologne and unused condoms in our wallets back at that show between me and my friends, it's a bit too much. I wanted to talk to you mainly about, comedy in New York, because you've been doing comedy in New York since what year, roughly?
I really don't remember, to be honest with you, but I started stand-up when I managed the comedy club in the mid to late '80s, and then I stopped. Mm-hmm. I stopped in '90, and then I started again in '98 when I got to the radio station.
Got it. So, yeah, and at the time, comedy in the boroughs especially. I mean, Manhattan, of course, had started having their sort of premier comedy clubs around that time, but in the boroughs, places like Pips in Brooklyn, where I saw you many years ago. Right. I saw you before many years ago, and you very in a very funny way made fun of me and my very Guido looking friends. We were all there in spiky hair and gold chains, and I remember you. This is before I knew you, obviously. And
how did you develop into a hipster?
No, this is just dad beard.
Okay.
This is dad beard.
I'll give you a pass.
You know what this actually is the pandemic beard that when no one shaved, and then I realized it covered a lot of my fat face. It just hid my cheeks better. Mm-hmm. So I trimmed it down, and now I have a 3-year-old daughter now, and now I feel like I have to keep it for her because I feel like it would horrify her if I just shaved it off. I look younger without it, but I also look much fatter. So it's more of a bottom mask than it is like a vibe, Honestly, I'm not. It's not a vibe. I'm not going for a look because most of my look is just fucking tired anyway. It's if I could just dress up some of this shit to distract from the fucking bags under my eyes, that's a good look for me. And so back then, little Guido in the audience at Pips, which was an amazing comedy club in Brooklyn years ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was ground zero for a lot of comedy. I mean, all the comedy out of Brooklyn.
Right.
The owner was a legendary guy. And, then Ray Garvey took it over, another legendary comedy guy. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, you would see anybody from Dice Clay,
right,
Colin Quinn, I know Vic DiBitetto worked there a lot.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so there were quite a few notable comedians that started there that went on to some very big things.
Yeah, it was like a comedy cellar of Brooklyn back then. The Comedy Cellar wasn't what it is now, but
that's an excellent description.
Right, it's like it was a hub for comedy. And you know what I loved about it was because New York was different back then and Brooklyn was different. Right. But it was a comedy club of Brooklyn in the way that Brooklyn was that borough of New York, right?
Yeah, sure. Especially,
you know what I mean?
Right next door to Randazzo's.
Right, which I believe is exactly where me and all my Guido friends went to go eat. Legendary
Yeah.
place, amazing food. And then we all went to go to the club, and you just ripped us open. We were like in the front, and you said we looked like an Italian in sync, which, you know, at the time in sync was, you know, kind of a big deal.
And if I remember correctly, that's quite a compliment, considering.
Yeah. Well, you know, we none of us were as fat as we are now. we all looked our best.
Yeah.
But also ridiculous, you know, because New York was obviously a different state, a different city. The boroughs were very different than they are now.
Going out was different. You know what I mean? There was no internet at the time. If you wanted to see someone, you know, whether it was personally or like at a comedy club or whatever it is, you weren't able to go online and download videos or anything about your favorite comedian. If your favorite comedian was in town, you had to go see him. And comedy clubs really were booming. When I got into it, it was quite spectacular.
It's kind of the beginning of that wave of comedy clubs, right?
Yeah. No, I used to go into the city when I first started performing, and I would go to catch a rising star.
Sure.
And I would sit in the back, all right? And I would watch the comedians, and this is right around the time when Chris Rock, Adam Sandler were just starting.
Sure. Late 80s.
I would sit there, and I would watch a show, and on the same show, now keep in mind, this is the same night, the same show, I would see Chris Rock, Adam Sandler, Jerry Seinfeld, Colin Quinn,
unbelievable,
Dennis Leary, George Wallace, Rodney Dangerfield, hosted by Richard Belzer.
Holy shit.
And I can go on and on. Now, that's the same show. I would see all these comedians. Obviously, I didn't know what I was watching at the time. There was no way. But it was historic comedy. And in the city, the premier club at the time was Catch a Rising Star, the Comic Strip, and the Improv.
Right.
And there was a comedy boom, and there was a real boom in talent too, because you can go to the Comic Strip, and, you know, Eddie Murphy was there. I believe Letterman was at the Improv. You know, there was a talent all over the place.
Yeah, and so that, you're right, that is what is the comedy boom, right? And then that's New York. Like, it was the comedy boom nationwide was basically out of New York.
Well, it's still that way for some reason. Comedically, if you are going anywhere, you have to go through New York.
Now, do you think that's because I mean, there are also now a lot of comedy clubs in New York, of course.
Right.
So there's much more of an opportunity. You know, like there's a few in LA, but you have to drive to all. You can't just hop around the subway and do like 6 spots in a night, right? So that's part of it, right? But do you think part of it is also like that funny, you know, sort of wise ass, sort of tough minded people come out of New York as well because of the vibe of the city?
I think it's the grit.
The grit,
you know
right?
I think it's the grit, and I think that's why you get a lot of good comedians out of Boston, like Nick DiPaolo, Bill Burr.
Sure, same.
Jay Moore. That's another gritty town. You know what I mean? And you know, those are comedians. You know, when you grow up in cities like that, and you know yourself, you hung out with a whole bunch of guys, and you go to the street corner. The humor is so different.
Oh yeah, it's brutal.
You know,
I mean, brutal.
Yeah, it's not polite. And
no, you know, that's what I was just talking to. I'm not sure if Ken Krantz, if you know, is. I was just talking to him about this. Like, it's like, you know, we feel like we were formed even by our families and our cousins, and then all of our friends. Everyone was just so goddamn mean to each other.
Yeah.
You know, it's like even the like people who couldn't do comedy at all are funny.
Right.
Everyone around you is funny because everyone's fucking fighting for their lives verbally.
Yeah. And especially in an Italian family.
Right. Yeah. Everyone's a wise ass.
There weren't many people, and the women in Italian families really don't have filters. So they added to the, you know what I mean?
Right.
You know, it would be nothing to show up on Thanksgiving. And Anthony talks about this in his act. You show up in Thanksgiving and your aunt would say, before she says hello, "Oh my God, look how fat you got." You know what I mean?
Yeah, they pinch you a little bit.
Yeah, not even like you gained weight.
Well, the funny thing is that those are the same people then screaming at you if you're not eating enough.
Yes, exactly. So,
I mean, you're the reason. Johnny, I had like the cholesterol of like a 40-year-old obese man when I was 5. I went to the doctor. I talked to my mother about this all the time. I'm like, when did I have my first fucking banana? Like, I was just eating, salami.
Well,
and imported cheeses every day.
Yeah. Well, when you have fettuccine Alfredo for breakfast, you're
right.
you're destined for high cholesterol.
Yeah, there's just cheese and cured meat and everything, right? And you're right, like you're around that family that they're the reason why you are the way you are, personality-wise, physically, all that stuff. And you just walk in and it's fucking brutal. Did you have that with your family? Like you just walk, like anyone at any given moment can just get roasted for like 20 minutes.
A little different for me. I mean, I grew up in the Bronx, and half my family lived in the building that we grew up with. So it was very, very tight knit. My grandmother and my uncles were there, and my father I lived in the same building. My father grew up. I went to the same grammar school as my father in the Bronx. And, there was a real neighborhood feel. We lived in a 4-story walk-up on Seymour Avenue, and 16 apartments, 15 were Italian.
Right.
And I come home from school, and I lived on the top floor, so I had to walk up every flight of stairs. Every door was open. Every door was open. I'm not
everyone just swapping in and out.
Literally open, and some Italian woman would come out on the first floor. "Johnny boy, I made meatballs. Come over here. I want you to try second floor cookies," or whatever it would be. And it was a totally different vibe. Like, now everybody has the Ring doorbell.
So do I, man. So do I. I grew up. I was born in Bushwick in a 3-story walk up. I grew up in Queens. Same thing. Everyone, even when we moved into Queens and it was a house, family in and out, friends, neighbors in and out. All the Italians just sort of like came by and dropped off food. The weekends were just like Grand Central in the house with like other Italians coming over. But you. Now, and I'm in Westchester. I'm in a very nice place, but I mean that those doors are locked.
It's a totally different world now.
It's a different world, yeah. But it is kind of funny because I am like more cautious now in this super safe place. I mean, you can't be too careful anywhere, but than I was when I was in Queens walking around the streets. Yeah.
Well, right now the biggest difference is with people. I find. Is everybody has 2 personalities. Mm-hmm. Have an online personality, and they have a reality personality, what they are. Yeah. You know what I mean? And most of the time they don't align. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's totally different. People people go online and they say and do and act or show pictures that are not really representative of who they are. You know what I mean?
Right. They're like, the family's so happy at a picnic, and like you find out 3 weeks later they're divorced.
Especially the attacks. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure. Hiding behind a keyboard. Yeah. Yeah,
they're very cowardly, and people will attack you online regardless, maybe political or.
Do you see a lot of that? Do you and Anthony see a lot of that? Do you get attacked?
You know what? Not really, because when people come to our shows, we've been traveling the country for 5 years, so they basically know what our brand of humor is.
Yeah, those are your fans at this point coming to your shows. Yes. It's not you're not walking into random club. It's a no name.
Home field advantage.
Yeah, sure. No matter where you go, because those are your fans.
If I go into the city and I perform, let's say at Gotham, I'm definitely going to do a different set than I would do in Florida.
Sure. Yeah. How much? Yeah. I was just gonna. That's a great point. How much do you tailor? I mean, is really an entirely different set? You think?
No, it's not entirely different. It's just that
You're cautious. You're cautious about some things.
I don't want to use the word cautious, but I would say if I go into the city, my humor um, will have more of a general appeal as opposed to, if I do something in Florida or even Long Island or New Jersey, um, and then you go into the city and you'll see a totally different brand of humor.
Oh,
Um,
sure. Brand humor and an audience like reception versus not receiving.
well, you'll see in the city, you'll find, I mean, there's a lot of great comedians in the city. I
Of course.
mean, um, as good as me, even much better.
Hmm.
It goes right across the board. Um, but that being said, some comedians come out now and they're not traditional comedians in the sense of, let's say, a Seinfeld who is a monologuist, right?
Sure. Sure.
Or a Jay Leno. Those are comedy purists.
Hmm.
If
Yeah.
you're a comedy
Right.
purist, you'll enjoy that type of comedy.
Hmm.
Or you have, let's say somebody like Bill Burr or Chappelle, who have something to say, but in a very funny way. And
But the
then
mechanics are so much different
yeah,
than
yeah. And
yeah.
then you have another brand of comedian um, that comes out and basically lectures you. You know what I mean?
Sure.
They'll lecture you on politics, on
Hmm.
climate change, on gender ideology.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and let me tell you something. There's an audience for that.
There isn't, but it's I kind of don't understand that brand or the mechanics of those jokes in the sense that like, first of all, it's like have an opinion. Of course, every comedian has strong opinions, right? And do your jokes, but I never, I don't know. I feel like they're trying to make too much of a social impact. It's like, God damn it, I want you to be funny first. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that those guys are not funny,
Yeah.
but like, what's coming first? What's more forward in your act? Is it a lesson or is it comedy? Because if I'm going to a comedy club, I want to fucking laugh, and I don't care if it's against my political side or my religion or my race. You know what I mean? I want to laugh.
Well, yeah. Well, because you understand comedy in a different vein.
Yeah.
Sometimes the audience doesn't. And sometimes you'll get an audience, and there'll be some people in the audience, and they don't understand that it's not the job of the comedian to champion their cause
Right.
or to manage their pain
Hmm.
or to alter their act to any individual's sensibilities.
Right.
So what you'll get is somebody who will find something in your act and they'll get offended. And it's like if you're going to if you are the type of person that gets offended easily, you do not belong in a comedy club.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And that I feel that's always been the vibe because there's always been people who get offended. But now, and I respect the clubs and the venues that just let the comedians do their things. Because every once in a while you'll be like, you go somewhere. And it's a little bit more when you do the private gigs, but you get like people telling you like, oh, just try not to do too much of this, and you're like, oh, Jesus. Like it's my job to read the room too and to know where to go. But like being told what to do before you go on is
Right.
awful. Is awful. But I, to a degree, like while I don't love that, a booker or a venue might ask you to do something or not do something, I also understand how sensitive the crowds are. So I guess you can't completely put them in fault in that sense, but it used to just be that if you offended someone on a personal level because you were picking on them like you were doing crowd work,
Right.
and then that person's sensitive, you used to be like, oh, well, you would have that mentality, like, why you're in a comedy club. But now it's like, you just didn't say the thing they agree with,
Well,
you
yes
know?
and no. I mean, because look at Matt Rife.
Yeah.
He basically does crowd work, and he's probably, in in a super top tier comedian right now.
Yeah, but he's hot.
What?
But he's hot.
Well,
you know?
I mean, there's a certain amount of people that go to look at him, and there's a certain amount of people that go to hear him.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not going to fault him for being a good-looking guy and in shape.
I will.
You know, because I have to tell you one thing. You know, being in shape as a comedian is a blessing, because most comedians are out of shape anyway.
I know.
So when you
you're looking at him.
So when you go on stage, I mean, obviously, you know, your physical presence gives you a certain amount of command, you know, and it works for him, and he works around it. And you know, he's obviously very female friendly, and they come out to see him, and they love his shows, and he's
no, I don't hate on that. Look, he's funny. He's funny, and he's good at what he does, and he has his audience. I mean, you can't hate that, right? I mean, you guys have your audience. You know, it's a different audience than his, but it's you guys have your, like, you. When I say you guys, I mean you and Anthony. You know, like you have your audience, right? Like you have a type probably that you could find in your audience. That's,
well,
you know,
in the beginning, you know, because of Anthony's videos, you know, I mean, we were
Italian,
heavy Italian.
Yeah.
But as time went on, that lessened a lot. You know, we got a broader audience, and you know, in the beginning, we would get the Italian mothers and fathers, and grandmothers and grandfathers, an older crowd, and then they started bringing their kids, and the audience started to get younger and bigger and broader and whatnot. And you know, funny is funny. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can't, if it's funny, I mean, it's just, funny reigns supreme. And you know, if you're funny, there'll always be work for you.
And that's why I love you guys as a pair. Obviously, Anthony's, you know, younger, and like he's, you know, he hit it big on content, but he is funny. Like he could clearly do stand up very well. You know, where like
he's the exception.
Right. Like so many content. There's a few. There are a few that are.
There are a couple of people who were able to make the transition.
Yeah, because they had it and they just weren't doing it. Maybe.
Yeah, I have to tell you, as a rule, you know what I mean. As a rule. Most of them don't go on to sustain long comedy careers. You know, I speak to the club owners, and they'll get these guys who are have 1 million followers, and then they'll do a show, and they'll pack it out, sell every ticket, and then the owner will bring them back the second time, and then they'll have maybe 60% of what they had originally.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, people go, they see it, they want to see the person, and you know, although they're funny online in 60-second, 2-minute, 3-minute bits, right, and then it doesn't translate to being on stage. And
they don't have like an actual act.
They don't have an actual act, or you know, they don't have the experience. You just it's next to impossible, as you know, as a comedian, is just to grab the microphone and get up there.
Yeah. No, it's you're working out. It's to make the parallel to being in shape, like you were talking about. I mean, you don't even know how many times have you wrote something and you're like, this is gonna fucking kill, or you wrote something you weren't sure about that like it gives you the opposite reaction, and you workshop it. That's what I think people don't get. People who do that don't get is like, you have to workshop your jokes, and the only way to workshop your jokes, it's not online, it's not in front of a mirror, it's in front of an audience. Like, yeah,
and you know, that's what my wife is for.
Right? Oh, my wife doesn't want to hear any of my jokes. Yeah, doesn't even come to the shows anymore.
If I, at this point, like, I'll run a joke by my wife, and if I get nothing. If I get nothing, then I start to question her. You know what I mean? What didn't you like about that? Right. Why do you think that was funny?
Yeah.
If I get a smirk out of her, I know I have something there. If I get her to laugh, I know it's guaranteed it's going right into my act.
It's like 2 degrees back in reaction that you're looking for. You have to gauge it. You're like, okay, it's whatever she does plus 2.
Yeah.
It's
my wife, you know, and then, you know, sometimes I'll go down to get my coffee and I'll start working my act. they don't know it.
Yeah, you're doing it natural in conversation. Yeah.
Or I'll work a joke in here and there, and I'll see if the guy, behind the counter, who may be Pakistani or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
If that guy laughs, I know it's a hit.
It's a great place, writing in real life. Like I haven't wrote in a notebook since I was started because I just do it in my phone because I just write on the go because it's like, you're just out talking and something sort of bubbles up and you see the joke and you just like ignore everyone for a minute. You write down the premise and that's what I do. Like I just sort of write in my phone as I'm like out because that's where I'm such a horrible, I don't sit down to write ever. Like I only sit down to write the jokes I thought of when I was out,
Yeah, I mean, and everybody has their own writing style.
Yeah,
right. I mean? Everybody, and everybody, everybody has a different formula.
Yeah, right.
But if you don't put the work in, the bottom line is, if you don't put the work in and you don't get up on stage, it's going to be a long haul.
I mean, do you think that, going back to the content creators, do you think that the way crowds are now, taking both of those components we just talked about, right? The way crowds are now, do you think they're kinder to these guys starting out than, I started comedy in 2006, right? Like, I think that I saw the last of old New York comedy in terms of the way the clubs were, the way the business ran, the way the audiences were. They were still they still felt like what I believed as an audience member years before that when I was going to see shows. It still felt like that. You had the underground cool clubs, there weren't all these trendy pop-up shows. You needed your venues that gave you comedy and those, So I think I saw sort of the last of that. And obviously we've all seen the sort of evolution or de-evolution, whatever you want to call it, of what that is in New York. Do you think that let those guys going out to do it now who don't really have an act? Because I would imagine even up till when I started 2006, one of those guys went out without an act, they would have just died. I mean, audiences were brutal back then in a different way that they're brutal now, Well,
you know what? I mean, these social media guys, they have their audiences. I mean, I seen a guy come out in Long Island. I forgot his name. And his opening line was, "Am I the only one here who's depressed?" And I never seen anybody start a show like that.
Yeah.
I thought that was unusual. And I'm like, okay, my first reaction as a comedian is, all right, where does he go with this?
Right, maybe there's something really funny behind it, but or was he just searching for empathy because he knows there's empathy in the crowd these days?
No, and he goes, how many other people have anxiety here? And half the audience raised their hand, and I'm like, okay, he's talking to his people.
Those are his people.
And I watched them at the end of the show line up to buy merchandise from this guy, and I would barely label it as a comedy show. And that doesn't mean because he wasn't funny. It just was not the comedy that you and I...
It didn't have the beats of jokes and comedy.
It didn't have the feel of a comedy show. It just had the feel of
a one-man show type of thing. It's sort of a little bit more of a hear me vent about or tell you about my life, and I'm sort of humor. I think there has a semblance of humor in it, but there's no punchlines with some of these guys, right? There's no mechanics of a joke.
No, they didn't. There was very little mechanics of a joke, but it was interesting because there's an audience for that now.
And he's selling merch.
There's always, you got to remember, there's always disenfranchised people.
Oh, sure.
And now because of social media, there's a lot of, people who were disenfranchised, ostracized or whatever.
Sure.
Felt left out. They have a place to go. You know what I mean? And that's one of the good things about social media. You know what I mean? It includes everybody. Everybody's included. Everybody can participate, and there's they don't have to worry about being shamed or anything like that. You know, I when I was at the radio station, I started doing comedy again because most of my appearances were at nightclubs. Okay, and I would do
dance nightclubs. You mean
yeah,
yeah.
I'd be down Jersey Shore, I'd be in Brooklyn, I'd be in Long Island, I'd be all over.
Yeah.
So
Bars
I
and
said
clubs,
to
yeah.
my boss, I said, I want to start doing stand-up again because I want to reach the people who don't feel comfortable going to a nightclub that listen to our radio station. Those people would come to the comedy club and I would see them. And
it's a much more real experience where the nightclub is a much more superficial thing, right?
Comedy clubs welcome everybody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? All different shapes and sizes. And you know, nobody addresses this, but nightclubs don't.
Yeah, it's much more superficial. It's much more of a appearance. You know, people are going to hook up, you know?
You got to have money. You got to have the clothes. You got to have the look. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know, that type of stuff. And, you know, that's a certain group of people. And then there's also, you know, everybody else who, people just want to have fun. So it was good for me. I got to reach out to a broader audience of people that, that enjoyed the radio station. So it was good for me professionally, you know, because I diversified my talents, and it was good for the radio station also.
Now, why? And I'm interested in this because I like talking about this with comics, even though it's a little depressing. Why did you quit in the first place? Because I quit comedy once because I felt like it was killing me and it was too hard. But then I had to come back. Like I felt like I had to come back to it. Why did you quit in the first place?
I didn't quit. I got a job doing something else.
Oh, okay, got it. It just took your time.
And I did that job for 8 years, and then I got back into the radio in '96, and then I decided after 2 years. I don't know if you remember, but the station was extremely popular.
Yeah, KTU in New York for sure.
Yeah. The launch was like ridiculous. We were #1 in the country
for sure. It was the biggest thing.
RuPaul was on the morning show.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of excitement around the station. I forgot
about that. I forgot RuPaul was on the morning show. Yeah.
And I figured it would be a good way to relaunch my comedy career.
Yeah. Out for people outside of New York, like KTU, the launch of the station you were on was this young dance, cool station. That was massive. That doesn't, it's hard to compare to anything now, right? It's like hard to compare to anything like talk medium wise because it's all niche audiences with podcasts these days. But
and you got to remember, I mean, there were no iPhones at the time.
Right.
There were no shuffles, none of those things where, people downloaded their music. People went to the radio stations, and you got also nightclubs were very popular back then. They're not now.
Sure. Like.
You went out. You went out 2-3 times a week, and you loved it. You know what I mean? You went out like you had a crew.
Mm-hmm. It was all nightlife. That's our whole existence. Was
you guys bounced around.
Yeah.
People don't do that anymore. And if you didn't go out, you didn't meet anybody. Now, all you have to do is go on one of those dating apps.
Oh yeah, that's a great point because you couldn't date if you didn't go out. You had to meet people out, and it was a whole. I don't know if young people understand this. It was a whole fucking game. There was methods that people talked, like you and your boys talked about. All right, well, when you, this is how you approach. This is how you buy the drink. You don't call them right away. There was like all these rules to the game, and they mattered.
Not only that, I mean, you had to go out and I remember me and my friends. I need a shirt for Friday night.
Right.
You know what I mean? I got to go to Cross County. I got to get a shirt for Friday night.
That's so funny me now I think like I don't want to wear anything but a t-shirt anywhere I go.
Well, right now, I mean, dresses like me and Anthony have been traveling around the country for 5 years. I can tell you one thing: if you want to see people dressed down, get on an airplane. Good God in heaven!
Yeah, you're like you left the house. You You were.
I know.
I was talking to Joe Pontillo. Do you know Joe? I'm not sure if you know Joe.
Yeah, I know who Joe is.
Yeah,
Very
so
fun.
Joe's my oldest friend in comedy. I've known him forever.
Yeah.
I was talking to him, and he was like, another comic. He was like,
Right.
he came and he had like shorts and flip flops on. I'm like, that guy's working. That's not even an audience member, and that's how that's the vibe he's. But he used to be, to your point, like you had to get like a new button down shirt, and you wore like dress shoes. Even if you're wearing jeans, you wore like dress shoes with it.
Haircut.
Fresh haircut.
Fresh
Always
haircut.
fresh. Yeah. Your shoe game, your shirt, and your hair had to be on point.
And cologne.
Oh God, the doused. We all just smelled like such whores. We were just doused in cologne. I think we all just like kind of did like a 7 spray mist.
I remember one time, this is a funny story. I was in a club and me and another gentleman were talking to a girl, and she goes to my friend, she goes, well, what do you have on? And he goes, Givenchy. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. Some really expensive cologne.
Yeah, I know the brand you're talking about.
His mother bought him from Bloomingdale's. And she goes that night. She goes, oh, it smells nice. And she goes to me, what about you? And she smells my neck. And she goes, I love what you have on. And I said, it's Brut by Fabergé. And my friend just walked away. That my $2 Brut beat.
That's what my dad was. That the one that was like the green?
Yes.
The green like egg?
Yes.
That's my dad wore that. My dad wore that for years. Yeah, so that was my first cologne, because my first cologne was using his cologne.
Yeah, my friend goes, if I don't want to be part of any woman that enjoys Brut. So I thought it was hysterical.
He's like, I'm looking for a wife. She needs higher standards than Brut.
Yeah. So
but
it was pretty funny. But
that's funny.
That's what it was like. And the club.
It all mattered. Like all those little things you did. Like you really had to piece yourself together. Think about that. Like you think about going to a bar now. It's like, I'm a sneaker guy. Like I'm like, as long as I have like a nice pair of like Jordans on, or like that's all I really care about. I look like this when I go out. And everyone, because I'm not going to dress up when no one else is, but not that I go out anymore. I have a 3-year-old at home, but I even to do comedy, I used to wear a button-down shirt. Like I dressed when I started doing comedy, come to think of it, maybe people were like, look at this fucking Guido. But when I showed up to do a set back then, I never went out in a t-shirt or even a sweat. I always like really got dressed up, because maybe it's a part of being an Italian too. Like I grew up with that, like when you leave the house, you can't look like shit. You don't wear pajamas out of the house. You fucking slob, you don't do that. No. And so my hair was always done, button down shirt, I had a gold chain, nice jeans.
Yeah, no, it's
leather shoes.
It's totally different now. Now it's about filters, online pictures, and right. Where you've been. It's so funny. So many people take pictures of like where they've been, or something, and sure. It's like they miss the experience. You know what I mean? They just go there to it's like when you watch a Yankee game on TV and you see everybody on their phone. Yeah,
they're watching the game through their screen,
or they're talking to a friend or whatever. You know what I mean? And I think people miss out on the experience today because of the phones.
Oh yeah, I think
great things about the comedy club. They tell you turn off your phone.
You can't have your phone out like that. Yeah, and if you even dared, if you got away with the comedian would fucking smash you for it.
Yeah, the comedy clubs and church are the two places where phones are taboo.
Right. Which are, it's funny because they're kind of opposite. Opposite opposing places. But also it's come to the whole thing you're talking about though, of like the experience and everything. New York itself was also so different back then. We were in a New York that like every neighborhood, it kind of feels like the boroughs at least kind of blend together these days. Like each borough had its own vibe, and it was all grit. To your earlier point, it was all gritty, but like the Bronx, to me, was known for, the Bronx was tough, right? Yeah. Like the Bronx is still tough, but like the Bronx was tough. Like it was sort of a neighborhood, but I mean, like you just didn't fuck with guys from the Bronx, right?
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn too, especially certain parts of Brooklyn.
Manhattan was nightlife, restaurants, plays.
Right,
You know,
right.
and Staten Island was, God, Staten Island seemed like it was a million miles away all the time.
Back then, it was what people refer to as the forgotten borough. Like people really didn't.
Borough, and Queens was known for its diversity.
Right. You know, which I'm sure it still is. But yeah, Queens. You're right. That was Queens, and they all had their own vibe. And like the neighborhood, every neighborhood was like based on a race. You know, like based on or on a culture, I should say, more than a race. Like based on like one nationality. You know.
I mean, it's weird too because, like I said, I grew up in a really strictly Italian neighborhood.
Yeah.
And like Astoria is a Greek neighborhood, and then you had Bell Boulevard in Queens was Italian, and Flushing was Korean at the time, and so on and so forth. And by today's standards, that would be considered racist.
Yeah, nothing is. But in a way, isn't it like kind of the opposite? Because gentrifying a neighborhood and pushing people out of a neighborhood doesn't feel like the right thing to do either, right? Like,
no, but it's just so different today.
It's all mixed. It's all a mixed bag these days, which I guess in some sense is good, but in another senses could be kind of
I think like anything else, I think I'm all for diversity. But I think sometimes they go a little bit too far with it. You know what I mean? Some people feel more comfortable living with, people that of the same ilk.
I think your point is like the forced diversity, right? Like it's like people expecting everyone to feel a certain a monotone feeling of everything, as opposed to I grew up in a very Italian neighborhood. Most like I was born in Bushwick, but then which was Italian, and then it wasn't. And then I lived in Howard Beach in Queens for a long time. That's like Staten Island now, but like within a much smaller pocket.
Yeah.
It was like this very Italian neighborhood, all great pizzerias every 3 minutes, and all this stuff, right? And like I was also in Queens, so it was diverse all around us. But like I liked where I grew up. Like it's funny as I got older, I was like a little less into it because I wanted to go out and explore and do comedy and stuff. But like, yeah, there are certain people. My point is though, not necessarily myself, but like there are certain people who love that. They just want to be there with Italians, speaking Italian, eating Italian food all the time.
Well, I mean, it's like that in the Indian culture. There are tremendous Indian neighborhoods in Queens where my wife used to live in Floral Park. Indian stores, Indian food, Indian places of worship. And, people gravitate to that, and they want to be around their culture. I don't see anything wrong with that, I don't see anything wrong with like when I lived in Manhattan. I lived in Manhattan for 17 years. Mm-hmm. And, that's about as diverse as you can get.
Right. Well, there's nothing wrong with either of those situations as long as people are not hurting each other, right? Like there's no right or wrong demographic of a place as long as people are respectful of each other. You know what I mean? As long as you're not,
Yeah, I think it's like anything else. Water seeks its own level. Whatever you feel comfortable with, that's where you belong. Everybody has everybody has a different idea of what happiness and home is like.
Sure, of course.
And I think that should be encouraged as opposed to being told,
how to feel.
What your neighborhood should look like.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, or what your home should be look like. And now what affects comedy is we're being told how to talk.
Right. We're being told, but and it's like from people who are not experts in what's funny,
Well, look, we talk for a living, and people want to tell us how to talk. You're allowed to say this. You're not allowed to say that. Don't go here. Don't go there. You know what I mean? What's your pronouns? Crazy stuff. And what's funny, I always found the pronouns very funny because I ran into a couple of incidences where I don't have any problems with the pronouns. I'll call you anything you want, but I'm not a psychic. You know what I mean? And like,
right. Yeah, you get bashed for not knowing someone else what they prefer. Right.
I don't identify as Mary. Well, I'm sorry, I thought your name was Mary. No. My pronouns are she and her. Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Right. If you disclose that, most people will call you what you want to be called, right? Like most people will.
No, it's a real shit show out there when it comes to that, know. And there's a lot of confusion. I mean, look at how many genders do we have now? I don't know, 57, whatever it is. I can't keep up with that. I don't know. I don't know all 57.
Well, look, pronouns should be like technology. After a certain age, people shouldn't expect it of you. It's like I'm not going to expect my mom to ever understand Instagram. The same way I don't expect her to understand the pronouns.
I'm going to predict the future. I think in the future you won't have a name. You're just going to have an email address. Like your daughter will be like, hot bitch 55 at gmail.com.
That is my nightmare. What you just said.
Your son will be Yankee fan, 1978. I mean, that's the first thing people ask you,
Right.
On Instagram, I want to follow you on Instagram. All right, it's at Goumba Johnny.
Right.
That's my real name, but that's...
Your first name's not Goumba?
No, there's no Saint Goumba.
Right.
And believe me, you'd be shocked how many times I get asked that question.
If your first name is Goumba? Maybe, some people in certain parts of the country don't know the term Goumba, though.
I'll go to a hotel, and Anthony will make the reservations.
Yeah.
And they'll go, can I have your license, Mr. Johnny? And I'm like, that's not my name. Mr. I said, here's my license. And we just laugh, but it's all right.
Well, your nickname of Goumba Johnny comes from, was that for the radio? Was that? Yeah. Right. So, and that's that's 90s and New York. You mentioned something before about like the strong Indian neighborhoods and the Italian neighborhoods and all this stuff. The comic I work with, Kunal Arora, who's very funny, an Indian comic. We were talking about like how the similarities in like growing up in those strong cultures. He's also from Queens, and he says he has a joke in his act about, I won't do the joke because I'll butcher it, but he has a joke in his act about like everyone at that time and place grew up vaguely Italian. Like no matter what culture you were, like even in an Indian neighborhood, as an Indian guy, he had like the spiky hair and the chain. Yeah. You know what I mean? So like, you starting in radio in the 90s, like that hits hard with everyone who's listening to you, because like we all knew a Goumba.
Well, you know what? It's very funny because we're talking about the Indian culture, and I didn't know this until I got to the radio station, is that dance music in the Indian community is huge.
Yeah,
and we have huge Indian following. So I got a phone call one day, and they said, Johnny, we want to invite you to Edison. We do this thing. We have it's 10,000 people under a tent. I said, what are you talking about, 10,000 people under a tent? No, it's this big prayer thing, and like 10,000 Indians will be there, and so on and so forth. They love you. They love the radio station. Would you be willing to appear there? I said, no problem. So I go, and sure enough, there's this huge tent that holds 10,000 people that just goes on and on and on. And the governor of New Jersey is there. Right? And they tried to introduce me to him and whatever it was. And he was, I don't want to say he was unfriendly, right, but he was not interested in me at all.
Okay.
And they introduced him first, and he gets a very warm round of applause.
Mm-hmm.
And then they introduced me, and they went crazy. And then after I got off stage, he comes over to me and goes, "What's your name again?" And I'm like, I couldn't stop laughing. You know what I mean? Because it shows the impact of the radio.
Did you know you were an Indian icon at the time?
No. And it's funny because I had these 8 Indian gentlemen. They would follow me from gig to gig, and they dressed the same. They had dockers on and dress shirts tucked in with the belt, and they would sit there, and the hair was nice.
Yeah.
They would sit at the same table. And after they came to a series of gigs and saw me, I talked to the guys after. I said, "Hey guys," I said, "I really appreciate you coming to all the shows." And they said, "No, we love your humor. We love your humor." And I said, "I noticed that, you get most of the jokes, and some of the jokes you don't get. Are you having a good time?"
Mm-hmm.
And he says to me, he goes, "Goumba Johnny, Indian people are very bright. Some of your jokes we get today, and some we get tomorrow." He goes, "What we get them?"
we get them at some point.
Yeah, so I said, "Great." Because that's a cultural thing, whether it's Indian or whatever it is, every culture has a different humor, so to speak.
For sure. Some is drier, some is a little more boisterous, some is more sarcastic. Yeah.
And that Italian thing is so loud and boisterous, you know what I mean? And references, like if I'll do a reference, an Italian reference or whatnot, and they didn't, they were great.
Language too, right? I feel like Italians curse so much. I do. Curse so much.
I mean, I just think it's part of the culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Italians can be described as very emotional.
100%.
You know what I mean? A lot of hugging, a lot of touching.
Screaming. It's a lot of emotion. It's a lot of highs and lows.
And I didn't realize any of this until I started dating, and you go to some girl's house and it seems so cold as compared to
no one's kissing each other hello. Yeah.
Well, even like if I had a girlfriend come over the house, my mother would go, "Well, what's your name?" And sit down, let me make you something to eat. What do you want?
Right.
Want some coffee and cake? My mother bring out coffee and cake, and they're not prepared for any of that.
Right. You better come hungry and emotionally prepared at an Italian's house. Like there's a lot going on. You're going to get your food thrown at you. You're going to have to eat it. You're going to have to talk a lot.
It's a wake-up call, when you realize the rest of the world hasn't been raised like you. Right. And you have to realize that when you get on stage too. So,
for sure.
What you do as an Italian comedian, if you're doing some type of Italian humor, you have to give people, you're giving people, like look at Sebastian, and Anthony, they give people this inside look of what it's like to be Italian, what it's like to grow up Italian, and what Italian home life is like. And then people who aren't even Italian. I mean, look at Sebastian. He sell out the Garden 5 days in a row?
Right. Yeah.
100,000 people. That's not all Italians.
Right. No, so much of it is relatable. Like, when I was speaking to Canal, we were talking about this. We're like the same age. We're in our late 30s, and come from the same place, but two different cultures. It's like our childhoods were like identical. Right. So I think that's what that is, because you're talking about family life, you're talking about being married, and you're doing it maybe from this, like, for Sebastian, like Chicago Italian, right. For us New York Italians, you're doing it from that point of view. But if you're good enough at your craft, you know how to make it so that it hits with people, right? Because it's all relatable shit. Like, I've also seen it the other way, where people are so inside that it's like people aren't getting it.
I have to tell you, I love some of the Indian comics. I'm a huge Russell Peter fan.
Oh yeah, Russell Peters is great. Yeah.
I mean, I just think he's fantastic. I'm a huge fan of his. Some of the other, the fellow that works with Andrew Schultz is very funny. Akash
Singh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I I
Yeah, he's
love.
great.
Yeah, and I've seen some Indian women that are killers. They're really funny.
Oh, what's her name? She's like an older Indian woman. She's at the Cellar a lot.
Yeah, I mean,
You-
fantastic stuff.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
she's incredible.
And that shows. I mean, when I started comedy, you couldn't find an Indian comic in,
Right, right.
in a million years.
Or like Asian in general, like very few. Like you really didn't.
We had Margaret Chow.
Yeah,
She did very well for herself.
right.
And but now. Now I will say this: comedy is extremely more diverse than when I first got into it.
Well, there's so much more of it too. I mean, and there's so many more avenues for it now. There's so many clubs. There's the content part of it. And like you said before, funny's funny. So like the bad ones will weed themselves out, but it's everywhere now. This is like a very different comedy boom than what you saw. But this is a whole new comedy boom.
Yeah, it's totally it's totally different. I embrace it. I enjoy it. I try and help young comedians when they ask for help. It's good. It's healthy. I like it. I mean, going on stage for me is a blessing to get paid. To make people laugh.
Right. What else? What else could you ask for?
It could be the best job in the world.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I tell people that they don't know about being a performer and a comedian is I have a job where I can't hide. Okay. It's like, in other words, if I'm having a bad day or you're having a bad day, you go to work and you just sit in the back of the office and you don't talk to anybody. It's not like that when you're a comedian. You could have a death in your family, an argument with your wife. The bank could have made a big error, and you could be facing some kind of financial crisis. And you got to go on stage that night.
You have to turn it on,
and nobody cares.
Right?
Nobody cares. They paid their money. They come to laugh, and you have to be on.
Well, that's the thing. With a job, you're getting paid, and you can decide how you want to be with that money. But when you're a comedian, they're paying to see you. You have an obligation to those people.
And the radio was the same way too.
Sure. Same thing, right?
I had to show up every day. I had to be, bright and happy and positive and
for hours. By the way, your shift was probably like a 4-hour shift, right? 4 hours.
Yeah, but one of the things about radio which is interesting is 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, 20 hours of airtime. People listen to you, and they don't. No, one thing I loved about the radio, they never treated me or considered me a celebrity. Mm-hmm. They treated you like you were their friend. And they knew my mother's name. They knew the color of my car. They knew where I went to high school. You know what I mean? And
radio feels like a real people talking to you. In the way comedy is, right? Like you go see a comedian, that they're hitting on things in your life that is relatable. Yeah, right. Radio, even though, like you said before, KTU was as big as a New York station could have ever gotten. And
it was for a couple from quite a few years. It was the number one station in the country.
Right. Well, sure. The biggest market, and you guys, I'm sure, were syndicated, right? Like you were in.
No, we were not.
Oh, you were not syndicated.
No. What's interesting?
Oh, that might be a little before that. Like I feel like they blanketed, like took one show and put it in every. There was still more local back then, right?
Well, what happened was what was interesting is when I started at KTU, we were one of 12 stations.
Okay,
that was in 1996.
Yeah.
When I left in 2012, I worked for a company with all the mergers. I was one of 1,200.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Right. I remember when I worked there, like I think when I joined the company, like I worked on the promotions team for that company.
What year was that?
Like 2008.
Okay. All right. So we were in the city already.
Yeah. You guys, because you were in Jersey first, right? Yeah, I was. Yeah, I joined in that building that when they were in the AT&T building over there.
Yeah, Canal Street.
Yeah, right. And there were already a ton of stations. Like I worked for the cluster of the New York stations.
Yeah, at the time, you're only allowed to own 5 stations in a market.
Okay.
So they still do, KTU, Z100, Light FM, 104.3, and Power 105.
Right.
Those 5 stations that are under iHeart right now.
Right.
But when I started, it was Evergreen Media, then it went to AM FM, and then it went to Clear Channel, and then it went to iHeart or whatever it may be. There was so many mergers.
Right. So when you were one of 12 and KTU was blowing up, the way it did.
Well, I will say this: it was more talent friendly back then because there were more stations, so you had to compete. You could actually go down the street and get a job somewhere else.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
As opposed to now, you have 3 or 4 groups that own, 5 stations each.
Right.
It's a little different.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Elvis Duran is in like 80 cities.
Right. Well, that's why I was in my mind. I was thinking the syndication thing because that was a little later. But then all of a sudden they started taking this. Yeah, but you lost in all those other cities. I feel like you do lose a little bit of that local radio thing in those cities, right? Because you have your New York station.
It's weird because I think local radio is suffering, and it's interesting because how could something suffer and it's free? You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like if a guy has a pizzeria and it's free and he's not making money, what does that mean?
Right.
You don't have good pizza. You know what I mean? So I think what they did in local radio, they marginalized the talent. They got away from their strengths, which was being local, with, big personalities. And they feel like, just play the music. Nobody wants to hear the DJ. And that's not really the case, because if that was, satellite radio does well and people pay for it.
Oh yeah, talk right. I mean, it's the reason why podcasting is what it is.
Right. And what's the difference between, satellite radio and terrestrial radio is, radio is in real time. It's local. You know what I mean? People tell you what the weather's like, how to dress for the day, make you laugh, get ready for work, so on and so forth. And I believe there's still a market for that. I don't think it's exercised properly.
Right.
Look at the success of Elvis Duran. I mean, he's got a great morning show.
Massive. Yeah, right. Yeah, he's incredible. He's great. Yeah.
He's in tons of cities.
Yeah.
And there's still a market for it if it's done correctly. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I just think there's radio. I think they ignored talent for too long, and I think they're paying the price for it now.
Yeah, and everyone now is going to, not even satellite, they're going to their own podcast, because everyone could just do this. Just get a camera in front of them and they could put it out and hopefully it catches, right? And then you can monetize it hopefully and all that stuff,
Yeah, and people, I mean, I have Apple Music, and they developed a station that says, Goumba Johnny music, and they, judging by the music that I play, they picked out hundreds of songs that I like, and let me tell you something, they're right on.
Yeah, I mean, you can't beat the algorithm, really. Like it's tailored. It's tailored to you.
And I listen to music that they pick for me, which I like all the songs, almost 95% of them.
Yeah.
And I listen to that when I work out.
Right.
And I'm amazed by that. And I'm like,
people took their rage that they used to have about like, oh, that station doesn't do what I want to do, and they put it online now. Because like I, before I worked for Clear Channel, I interned for Opie and Anthony. When it was, I guess it was just XM at the time. It wasn't merged yet. The two satellite companies.
Yeah.
And, that's a show where, now granted on satellite, people were paying for the service. So their fans kind of found them more than when they were on terrestrial radio. But I remember even listening to them before I worked for them, I was like, people would rage out and it was like, well, then don't listen. That kind of thing. The same thing we're talking about with comedy. It's like, then don't go to a comedy club. But that rage used to, I remember a lot of radio shows getting that hate. It was like, just change the station, right? But now it's like, you don't really have that in entertainment anymore because it's your whole feed is your algorithm. It's what you already like.
Yeah, it's what you already like. And they used to say back in the day that half the people that listen to Howard Stern listen to him because they don't like him. Right. And, which I've always found very interesting because
they hate listening to him. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you could move people either way.
Sure. Saying controversial stuff and people are getting mad at it.
And comedy works like that too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I hate listen to the news. I mean.
Yeah. Well, I mean, is it news?
Well, and I mean that listening to anything left and right. I hate both of it. Right? Yeah. I hate everything happening. I don't even want to get into it because by the time I record these ahead of time, by the time this airs, who fucking knows who the candidates will be? I don't know what's going on, but I hate all of it is all I could tell you.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, people are pretty fed up with politics. And I think the pandemic opened the eyes of a lot of people of the honesty of a lot of institutions.
Oh, sure, like the way we were getting information about
the information we were given, and we were told, what was supposed to be true wasn't true.
Yeah, it's also like if you didn't know, just say you don't fucking know. I know you're supposed to have confidence in those things, but like, just say you don't know. Because that's what a lot of it felt like. It was like you're making these declarations, and that's politics. That's politics now too. It's not just that. Like, I mean, that's people are just like, no, this is the way. This is the way.
No, I mean, just think of the vaccine. People did not invite relatives over their house for Christmas and Thanksgiving because they weren't vaccinated.
Yeah, including myself.
Okay, and that turns out to be not true.
Yeah, yeah.
In 6 feet. That was something that Fauci just said or whatever. Somebody came up with the 6 feet thing. There was no science behind that.
It's like two guys in a room. They're like,
the masks don't work.
I like to think that two guys were in a room, in like a white room, like in a lab, and he went, sneeze. And then they just saw how far the spray went. Yeah. Remember, the whole thing was droplets back then. It was like, the droplets, which sounded so fucking gross.
I still see people wearing masks.
Yeah, you see it
by themselves in a car driving.
That always killed me with the windows up. Like,
yeah, I don't get.
But back then it was also, a few years ago, it was also like you laughed at those people, but you're also like, I don't know, maybe they're just so paranoid because the news has made them so fucking paranoid that they think it's just circulating in the air. It's like a movie airborne virus, One of
the funniest things that me and Anthony saw, I think we were in California, and there was a guy on a motorcycle, no helmet, with a mask on, and we could not stop laughing.
Yeah. You're like, okay, you're protecting yourself from something.
Yeah, I don't want to get the virus, but a head injury is okay. You know what I mean?
Fauci didn't say anything about helmets.
No, Fauci said nothing about motorcycle helmets. So, I mean, there was so much.
People are losing their minds a little bit. You know what I mean? Like people were going crazy. I don't even fault the people as much as I fault the, information and the.
Yeah, I don't think people trust the institutions anymore. And furthermore, it is more of the responsibility of comedians to tell the truth now or make fun of the truth or the misinformation. to let people know that you know, keep comedy in some ways is the conscience of the country.
It's
And
funny when you make fun of it, though, right? Like you get people, if you make fun of one side, if you're going to make fun of both sides, like I like to make fun of both sides, right? Like,
yeah.
but I'll get a reaction to one, and I'm like, hold on a second, just give me a fucking second, I'm gonna get there.
Well,
Like, I'm gonna make fun of them too.
I'll tell you what I do sometimes. If I talk about something that I think is sensitive, I'll tell people right up front, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm a registered independent, and I'm not a fan of the government.
Right.
And I start from there. You know what I mean? I got no skin in the game. You know what I mean?
It's how comedians see things too. You're like just trying to see the truth, which I think if you really kind of look through the bullshit, you would never feel that much right or left if you really paid attention, because both sides are fucking insane. Like, I mean, like, now the candidates are different, but when I saw the debate, I was like, I don't know how anyone can be happy with any of this, right? Like, I don't know how either side can be, personally, like, regardless of who you voted for before that, how you could watch those two fucking guys in that moment and be like, you might still want to vote for one or the other because you're going to cast your vote, but how you could be happy because one side, said something extreme and the other side, he thought he was in like a dog park while during the debate, like, how you would feel okay with any of that is crazy to me. It's a circus.
Yeah. And that's why comedy is more important than ever.
It is. For sure.
A lot of these comedians speak the truth. I mean, I think sometimes Bill Burr is amazing. Some of the points he makes, I think some of the points Chappelle makes are very very important.
Isn't it funny though how when they make a joke about one side, the other says he's that thing. Like if he makes a joke about the left, they're like, oh, he's Republican. If they make a joke about the right, he's like, oh, he's a fucking stupid liberal.
I know, it's like if one of the things that I find really interesting and actually disturbing, if somebody wears a shirt with a flag on it and they label you as a white supremacist or MAGA. You know what I mean? My friend had a shirt on and some woman yelled out, MAGA! And I'm like, what's that all about? Oh,
wait, you had a white shirt on?
No, they had a flag.
Oh, you had a flag. All right, okay. Sorry.
And the American flag has become associated with this MAGA movement.
Right,
and
right.
I thought it was, like patriotic.
It is interesting, right? It is because it's the American, it's all of our flags, right? So right. How could that mean one or the other? You know what it might be? You know what it might be? The correlation of flags go toward Trump because he's got his own too. Right? Because like people don't fly a Biden flag. Like no one's flying a Biden flag. Like I think Schultz was like, this guy's got merch, like Trump's, like there's the people wear Trump shit. So I feel like, it's a weird correlation because wearing an American flag shirt is being pro-America,
I always, that bewildered me that, people would feel that way, not associate the flag with America first.
And it's recent. I mean, if you think about that, it's 2016, like not saying that the vibe wasn't there in the country before 2016, but once 2016 happened, like there was it's like we're in a Cold War, Civil War, right? It's like the country is divided. It's a non-violent version. It's a threat of violence. So like the Cold War, but it's a civil war, and the country is just, and that's why I hate everyone who is 2016 and beyond politically. Like I just want everyone who was a part of 2016 and beyond to just be gone, because it's like when Biden won and he had this whole like speech about like healing and all this stuff. Like he said all the right words, when he was able to say words. But it's like, but there's been no healing. It's still vicious. It's still, I don't know. Maybe it's going to take much longer than that, but.
Well, no, it's simple. If you want to control the masses, it's divide and conquer.
Yeah.
It's a simple formula. It's tried and true. It's been working.
And both sides are doing it. Yep.
It worked for centuries, and both sides are guilty of fear mongering.
Absolutely.
And that's the way they operate. You know, they motivate you to vote based on your fears.
Yeah.
Uh, you know,
Yeah.
not on
It's not about policy. Yeah.
yeah, not on your aspirations, hopes, or desires, but on your fears. You're supposed to be afraid of this, so you vote this way, and
That's
so
an
on.
interesting point. It's not about even being pro something. It's about what you don't want to happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
and and how did we get here? You know what I mean? In our lifetime, how did we get here? You know, it's amazing. It's amazing what I've seen in my lifetime. Um,
Sure.
I never thought, you know, I come from a family of veterans.
Hmm.
I never thought that anybody would look down on being patriotic. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Like on being a veteran or being a cop or yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's just like, you
Yeah.
know, and you just like you'll hear people say this country sucks. And you know, and then all the people say, "Oh, I want to move out." You know what I mean? I don't want to be here anymore. And
Yeah.
I don't think people understand what it's like in other places.
Hmm.
You know, they say that. Obviously, this is not a perfect world we live in.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
There's a
I,
lot wrong,
I,
but yeah.
I traveled a little bit. You know, if this is such a shitty country, then why did 15 million people come in here recently?
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. 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 I see what you're saying.
Yeah, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And it's
Right.
like 15 million, you know, at least 15 million people crossed the border. What, to find out how shitty it is here?
Right. Right. They're escaping something. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not the case. It's not, there's opportunity here.
Hmm.
And that's the type of things, the opportunity and the diversity and the dreams that could be fulfilled here are the type of things that should be accented. You know, people should hang their hat on that.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's interesting. So I saw Netflix has a documentary, like a new sort of look at documentary on Hitler and like the rise of Hitler, which is like there's a lot of shit there. I don't know if you saw it. It's pretty fascinating because there's a lot of things about him I didn't know. Like like I didn't know he fought in World War I. Like I didn't know he was even like you don't think of Hitler in World War I, right? You think of him as in the Holocaust and all that horrible stuff in World War II. Anyway, the point is like the way that he sort of preyed on the fears of people.
Yes,
And it's scary because it really is both sides. And we are not, you know, economically, yes, people like things are super expensive and all that stuff. But like we're in, you know, Germany at that time was going through an actual depression, right?
Yes.
And like, so it was almost easy to prey on the fears because so many people were down and out.
just like where we are right now.
Yeah,
You know,
right. Everyone's been led to believe that they're in the worst. It's as bad as it could get, whether you believe one side or the other. It's as bad as it could get for you. And so now we're looking to like saviors. And that's where you create deities, right? Like that's where you create people with savior complexes because, or the other way around, the people with the savior complexes created a world in which you think.
Well, what you hear now, the big phrase you hear now from, you know, is the end of democracy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, how's that going to happen? You know what I mean?
It does feel like that, you know, but that's fear mongering too, but it does.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I feel like we already live almost in a police state right now.
Yeah, it does. In certain parts of the country, it feels like that, right?
I mean, we imprison more people than any country in the world.
Mm-hmm.
We have more prisoners than China and Russia.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, the government is big and it's powerful and it always seems to win.
At least the potheads aren't getting arrested anymore.
I don't know.
Because, you know, that was always unfair.
I just feel like, I don't know what the answer is, but I just feel like I don't think anybody knows who's actually running the country.
Yeah, right. It does almost feel like there is a secret society that's actually trying to do it, right? It does feel like no matter who goes in there, it's all puppet.
I don't think it matters who. I don't think it's Biden, and I don't think it's Trump. I don't think it was Clinton. I don't think it was Bush. I just doesn't seem, after all the stuff that we've seen, the lockdowns and all that stuff.
Right.
I mean, it makes you wonder who is actually pulling the strings. Is there it's like the Wizard of Oz? Is there someone behind the curtain?
Yeah, right. Which makes you feel like a conspiracy theorist, but it's true because the only thing that ever really changes is the rhetoric. Just the point of view and the perspective change more so than things in the country actually. Like it's still someone gets elected, you're pissed about it. The country's still the country, right? Like it still is, but the narrative changes.
I mean, it makes you wonder: could the president actually change the country?
I don't think so. Like it's almost like what, like I don't know. Could we just vote on issues instead of voting on like put the people in place for like foreign policy, and then like let's vote on our own issues? You know what I mean? It's like can I just vote if I am for or against something? As opposed.
One of the answers is term limits.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think anybody who stays at any job for a period of time lends itself to some type of corruption.
Right.
Or some type of malaise or, sleeping on the job or whatever. You know what I mean? I just think it's always good to get fresh blood. One thing I have a problem with, somebody from a certain generation, just staying in a position for decades and not understanding the needs of generations that are behind him.
It should be like a driver's license where you have to, at some point they're like, you can't hear in your left ear. You can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, just get out, please. You're harming everyone. You're driving recklessly.
Like anything else, there's a lot of questions and no answers. You know what I mean? I don't know what the answer is. We all have a lot of questions, and I'm just hoping for the best for everybody in the country. I feel like I'm talking like I'm running for office, but
I think you should. I think at least local office.
It's well, you know what? I mean, could you imagine if a comedian became president?
I mean, they might not say all the things you'd expect a politician to say, but you would get people who are really looking at things, I think, much more. Of course, there are some comics who are extreme right and left, but like for the most part, you get people looking at things pretty honestly.
I'm thinking, here's my idea of the perfect president. Don Rickles. Don Rickles, going to the UN and just grabbing the microphone and making fun of
right. Just adding levity really is what it would be doing. Although people would be offended, you're adding levity to everything. Or like Bill Burr, I feel like, you get sick of just screaming about it,
Bill Burr would get my vote. I can tell you that right now. He'd get my vote 1, 2, 3, But it'd be funny if somebody like Don Rickles was president, like insulting all the world leaders, like,
Yeah, right. At the White House Correspondents, and like instead of getting comedians, he's just fucking with everyone.
Coming over to the president of Iran, going, Iran, how you doing? He goes, I didn't ask you how you got here. Just all hacky jokes like that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just like he twirls someone's mustache, someone's big chic mustache. He goes over and twirls it.
And then instead of having like these G8, G7 summits, you have roast. Yeah. Countries roast each other.
And honestly, take it even farther than that. You put Rogan in charge of the military. Just completely instate comedians. It could be our downfall, but it could be a fun experiment.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, Johnny, thank you so much for coming on.
I always love to kick it about comedy and about what's going on.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. It was a very insightful conversation. This is going to air.
I'm so glad that I was nice to you when you worked at the radio station.
Because you weren't always nice? No.
You're
like, I'm glad you weren't one of the people I threw something at.
I'm only teasing you because I get to see some of the guys that worked at the radio station, like yourself, have went on to do some really great things, and I'm so proud of them. You know, they came in as interns, they worked for nothing. Some one person who was a phone op of mine is in charge of a whole bunch of stations.
Oh, cool. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah.
And, you know, they'll reach out, they'll get in touch with me and, you know, say, Johnny, you always made me laugh and you were always nice to me. My big thing with the interns is when they first started, I used to go over to them and I say, what's your name? And they say, my name is Bob. I said, how are you? He goes, I'm Goumba Johnny. He goes, I know who you are, Johnny. And I said, what exactly do you do here, Bob? and they would just look at me and they go, well, I'm an intern. Okay, what's an intern? And then I would just tease them, and then they would get all nervous, and I would burst out laughing, and then they would realize I was just teasing them.
What does an intern do? Yeah.
If you need anything, if I can help you in any way.
Yeah, John, you were funny when I saw you back at Pips in God knows what year that was, when I was like 17 with my spiky hair. You were a hell of a guy when I worked at the radio station, and here you are again, you know, throwing me a bone coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. Do you have any plugs or things to plug? Like this is gonna probably air in like August, like late August.
No, do you have anything? I'm going to be in Jersey. I expect you to be there at the Avenel Theater.
Awesome.
On September 14th on a Saturday.
I'd love to.
I'm going to be there at the Avenel Theater. I'll let you know. Please come by.
Yeah, will do.
And I'm doing a show there. It's a beautiful theater. It holds about 200 seats. Brand new, very well done.
Awesome.
So it's going to be a good show. I'm working with some good comedians, and I hope to see you there.
Huge thanks to Goumba Johnny for coming on the show. This is A Bit Too Much podcast on all the socials. Like, subscribe, comment. I want to hear what you want us to talk about on future shows. And, you know, just fucking hit the thing. Hit the thing, and I'll see you next time, all right? This is A Bit Too Much.